The city was cold that morning, not because of the weather, but because of the way people moved. Everyone rushed past one another, their faces buried in screens, their eyes empty of warmth. It was a place where kindness often got lost in the noise of survival. Among the crowd was Emily Carter, a young woman in her mid-20s, dressed neatly but with weariness in her eyes. She had recently graduated, her heart full of dreams, but her life tangled in quiet struggles. Rejections from job applications had become her routine. Her savings were thinning, her confidence fading. Yet somewhere deep inside, she still believed that good things come to those who don't give up, and those who don't lose kindness along the way. Every morning, she visited a small café near the bus stop, her one quiet ritual before facing the world. It wasn't luxury, it was comfort. A cup of cheap coffee, a seat by the window, and a few stolen minutes of peace before another round of unanswered emails and ignored resumes. That day, the café was unusually busy. Rain tapped gently on the glass, and the smell of roasted beans filled the air. Emily stood in line, scrolling through her phone, half-heartedly refreshing her inbox, though she already knew there was nothing new. Ahead of her stood a man, tall, perhaps in his early 40s, wearing a simple suit that looked a little too humble for someone with his posture. His presence carried quiet dignity, yet he looked distracted, even burdened. When it was his turn to pay, he reached for his card, tapped it, and frowned. The barista tried again, but the machine blinked red. The man checked his wallet and murmured something, perhaps apologizing. A few people in line began to sigh impatiently. One muttered under their breath. Another rolled her eyes. The man stepped aside, visibly embarrassed. Emily's heart stirred. She knew that feeling. The sting of being looked down on when life tripped you unexpectedly. Without overthinking, she told the barista to add his coffee to her bill. It was just a few dollars, but the warmth of her gesture filled the room more than the coffee aroma ever could. The man looked surprised, almost speechless, though Emily barely made eye contact. She simply smiled faintly, took her drink, and sat by the window. He thanked her softly, his voice low, filled with something deeper than gratitude, perhaps relief, perhaps humility. Then he left. Emily didn't think much about it. To her, it was nothing extraordinary. Just a small act done quietly without expectation. She had always believed that kindness doesn't need an audience. It just needs intention. Days passed. Her life continued as usual, quiet, uncertain, heavy with rejections. Each morning, she'd wake with a faint ache in her chest, wondering if the world even saw her. She'd send more applications, tailor her cover letters, and wait. Sometimes she'd get an automated response, most times nothing at all. But life, in its mysterious rhythm, was weaving something unseen beneath the surface. One rainy evening, Emily got an email notification. It was from a large company, Harrington and Vale Enterprises, a name she barely remembered applying to. They wanted to schedule an interview for an entry-level position in their marketing department. She blinked, rereading it several times to be sure it wasn't a mistake. For the first time in months, she felt a spark of hope. The next week, Emily stood before the towering glass building of Harrington and Vale. The lobby gleamed with elegance, polished marble, minimalist decor, and people dressed in confidence. She felt small but determined. This was her chance to prove herself. The receptionist greeted her warmly and guided her to a waiting area. On the walls hung photographs of the company's achievements, charity projects, business awards, and community programs. The name Alexander Vale, the CEO, appeared on several plaques and articles. A visionary leader, known for humility and generosity. She had read about him once in an online feature, a man who rose from humble beginnings to build an empire based on integrity. Minutes passed like hours until an assistant called her name. Emily followed through a long corridor into a conference room where the interview panel awaited. She greeted them politely, her heart pounding as she tried to steady her hands. The interview began. Questions about marketing, teamwork, values. Emily answered with honesty, drawing from her real-life experiences rather than rehearsed lines. She spoke about her belief that businesses thrive not just on profit, but on human connection, on empathy and trust. Her voice trembled at first, but grew steadier as she spoke from the heart. The panel members exchanged glances. One of them smiled faintly, taking notes. Then the door opened quietly. A man stepped in. The room fell silent. The energy shifted, respectful, attentive. The assistant whispered his name, Mr. Vale. He entered with calm authority, offering a polite nod. Emily's breath caught as she saw his face clearly, the same man from the café. The stranger whose coffee she had paid for weeks ago. Her pulse quickened, her mind spinning. She hoped he wouldn't recognize her, not wanting the moment to feel awkward or misinterpreted. But his eyes lingered for just a second longer than necessary, as if memory tugged at him gently. Then he smiled, faintly, and took a seat at the end of the table. He listened quietly as the panel continued, occasionally asking thoughtful questions. Emily answered each one earnestly, unaware that the man who now evaluated her had once been touched by her small act of kindness. When the interview ended, she thanked them sincerely and walked out, trying to breathe through the flood of emotions. She didn't expect to be chosen. There were probably dozens of candidates, maybe better qualified. But deep inside, she felt something shift, as if life had silently acknowledged her compassion. As she stepped outside, the same drizzle began to fall. Gentle, rhythmic, cleansing. She smiled faintly, remembering that morning in the cafe. How strange, she thought, that paths cross without warning and kindness, invisible, forgotten, circles back in ways we never see coming. She didn't know it yet, but the coffee she had bought that morning had already begun to brew her destiny. And as the evening lights flickered across the wet streets, somewhere high above in his office, Alexander Vale stared out the window, holding a faint smile. He remembered the girl who had paid for his coffee when his card failed, a moment so small, yet so powerful, that it still lingered in his heart. He looked at her resume on the table. The name Emily Carter glowed softly under the office light. The decision, he thought, had already been made long before she ever walked into the room. The world, after all, has its quiet way of rewarding kindness, not instantly, not loudly, but perfectly in time. The days that followed the interview were filled with quiet anticipation. Emily tried to distract herself with chores, reading, and part-time shifts, but her thoughts kept returning to that glass building and the man she had unexpectedly met again. There was something poetic about it, the way fate had circled back, bringing her face to face with the stranger she once helped without a second thought. But she didn't want to build false hopes. Life had taught her that expectations often lead to heartbreak. So she waited, with a strange calm that was half faith, half fatigue. 3 days later, an email arrived. She opened it slowly, her heart thudding against her ribs. The words blurred for a moment before they settled clearly in her vision. "Congratulations, Emily Carter. We are pleased to offer you the position." Her hands trembled as tears welled up in her eyes. It wasn't just a job offer, it was a lifeline. After months of rejection and despair, she finally felt seen, chosen, valued. She pressed her palm against her chest and whispered a silent thank you, not to luck, but to whatever force had been guiding her quietly all along. Her first day at Harrington and Vale Enterprises was both exhilarating and terrifying. The office was vast, filled with people who moved with purpose. Everyone seemed confident, efficient, successful. She felt like an imposter at first, but she reminded herself she had earned this chance. Her work involved assisting in community outreach and corporate social responsibility projects, initiatives designed to give back to society. It suited her heart perfectly. She threw herself into her tasks, staying late, helping colleagues, learning quickly. Her sincerity stood out, even when she doubted her own worth. Weeks turned into months. Emily's dedication caught attention. Her manager often praised her thoughtfulness, and soon she was entrusted with leading a small project, organizing a citywide campaign for local job seekers. It was meant to help people struggling to find work after layoffs, providing them with guidance, training, and emotional support. As she coordinated the campaign, Emily saw reflections of her old self in every applicant, people with dreams but no direction, confidence but no chance. It filled her with compassion and purpose. She worked tirelessly, often forgetting to eat, determined to make the program a success. Meanwhile, Alexander Vale observed quietly from the sidelines. Though he rarely interacted with junior staff, he often passed by her floor, listening to her ideas during meetings. There was something about her presence, humble yet powerful, grounded yet inspiring. He never mentioned their first encounter, but he hadn't forgotten it either. One afternoon, the company hosted a leadership seminar in the main hall. Employees from all departments gathered as Alexander stepped onto the stage. His speech was not about profits or strategies. It was about values, the unseen currency that sustains humanity. He spoke of empathy in business, of leadership built on compassion rather than control. And then his tone softened as he began to tell a story. He spoke of a morning months ago when his credit card had failed in a small café. How a stranger, a young woman, had quietly paid for his coffee without hesitation. He described the humility in her eyes, the lack of expectation, the pure simplicity of the gesture. He admitted that he was having a difficult day then, not financially, but emotionally. A business partner had betrayed him, and he had begun to question his faith in people. That one small act, he said, reminded him that decency still existed. As he spoke, the hall was silent. Emily sat frozen in the audience, her pulse quickening. She didn't dare move, and then, slowly, his gaze swept across the crowd until it rested on her. He smiled gently, not the smile of a powerful man, but of a human being recognizing another soul. The audience followed his gaze, and in that quiet moment, realization dawned. Emily's colleagues turned toward her, their eyes wide, their expressions softening with admiration. Alexander continued, saying that sometimes the smallest gestures create the deepest ripples. That kindness, when genuine, always returns in ways we never expect. He ended the speech with a single line that stayed with everyone. Never underestimate. The power of being good, because you never know who's watching, or how your goodness may find its way back to you. Applause filled the hall. Emily's face was warm with emotion, her heart swelling with disbelief and gratitude. It wasn't fame she felt, it was something purer, validation. The quiet truth that her small kindness had not gone unnoticed by the universe. After the event, Alexander met her privately in his office. The walls were lined with books and awards, but his demeanor was simple, almost fatherly. He thanked her again, not for buying him coffee, but for reminding him that leadership begins with humility. He told her that her growth in the company wasn't charity, it was merit. Her compassion, her persistence, her sense of purpose, these were the qualities he wanted his company to embody. Then he handed her a folder, a proposal for a new initiative, a mentorship program for underprivileged youth, inspired by her current project. He asked if she would lead it. Emily could barely hold back her tears as she accepted. Over the next year, Emily's career flourished. The program she led grew into one of the company's most successful projects, helping hundreds find jobs and regain confidence. She became a quiet symbol of what kindness could achieve. Proof that goodness isn't weakness but strength in its purest form. She never bragged about her story, but people often whispered about the girl who once bought coffee for the CEO. The story became a legend in the company, a tale shared with new recruits to remind them that titles and positions mean little without heart. And as for Emily, she continued living as she always had, modestly, sincerely, and with a quiet belief in people. Sometimes she'd return to that same cafe, order her usual drink, and sit by the window. The barista, now familiar with her face, would often smile and ask if she wanted to pay it forward for the next customer. She always said yes, Because Emily had learned something profound. Kindness isn't a transaction, it's a seed. You may never know when or where it will bloom, but it always does. In the same cafe, months later, another stranger stood awkwardly at the counter, realizing he had forgotten his wallet. Emily, sitting by the window, noticed. Without hesitation, she walked up and offered to cover his coffee. And as she smiled, handing over a few bills, she remembered the day it all began. A simple morning, a failed card, a quiet gesture that changed everything. The world, she thought, always comes full circle. And in that circle, kindness never truly ends.